Do you ever feel that even though you're making more money over the years, the flexibility of your time is even more restricted? Or no matter how high you climb on the corporate ladder, your take home pay is barely changing because you just keep getting a larger tax bill? These were the same problems that we encountered. We are Radhika and Vibha, and we're on a mission to educate, empower frustrated high income earners into taking back control of your time, control of your finances, control of your life. And we're doing that through commercial real estate. Now, picture this. You wake up early to get ready to work on projects that you're actually passionate about. You have time to tuck your kids to bed or attend their midweek soccer game. You make it a point to attend birthday parties for your friends, and maybe you even make it a priority to focus on your health. And imagine what it would feel like if your income wasn't actually tied to the number of hours your butt was in your chair, but it was actually about how your money was generating more money. Now, all of this is possible, and we're here to show you how to make this vision a reality.
Welcome to Rich Roots. Our goal is to simplify commercial real estate investing for the passive investor by bringing on key players in real estate, hearing their stories, lessons learned, challenges overcome, and actionable steps which you can then take to get started. We'll also give you our perspective in how we got started and give you some unfiltered truths so you can also copy the blueprint to success.
All right, so this first episode is about our early influences. Today, we're going to talk about where we were, how we got started, and the next step that you can take to get going. So, Viva, let's start with your experience. So, can you talk us through your early influences?
Yeah, absolutely. I was brought up in a South Indian household in California, and my blueprint for success was follow the path of education, get good grades, go to college, get a good, stable job, and grow in that corporate ladder, right? It worked for everybody around me. And I always felt that something was missing since a really early age. I think since my teens, I've always had this desire to go see the world with urgency. I kind of went off this, roadmap of success in my early 20s. So I graduated college, worked for a year or two, saved a lot of that income, and then I very vividly recall the day that I told my parents that I was going to quit my job and buy a one-way ticket to New Zealand because I had this urgency to go explore, right? I was questioning, like, why am I working? Why am I paying rent? Is there more to the world? Like, what am I doing all this for? Um, that was a surprise. Like, that was a huge surprise for my parents, especially my mom, I think, but they were still supportive. And I grew up with this narrative, especially on the Tamil side, with this saying that my grandfather used to say, and my mom used to say, saying, Kurvi mari, Chaithavichuku. Literally just means like a sparrow, collect your seeds. And it translates to money. Collect your money. You never know when you're going to need it. Don't spend it on things that are not secure. And obviously, buying a one-way ticket across the world is not the most secure choice, but learned a lot about myself. And I think it really helped me kind of shape my investing future today and what I want. I really believe in trying to diversify those investing streams to have a path to passive investment. I know our paths were quite different, Radhika. What was your early journey and early influence like?
Yeah, I think early on, my path was very similar to yours, right? I also come from an immigrant background, was taught similarly, right? Get good grades, get a job, climb that corporate ladder. Like all the examples around me were successful. And I think at the time I positioned success as, a BMW or Mercedes Benz, designer clothes, and a fancy house. I think what really changed for me was I met my now wife several years after working, and she was very against renting. At the time, with the market actually in a better position than it is today, we were just in a position that, our mortgage looked very similar to the rentals in our area. So she was like, why would I want to rent instead of just buy and build equity? And that I think was like the seed that I needed in my mind to start thinking about what can equity do for me, sort of. And then A second big turning point for me was I became a mom several years later, and having kids really shifted your perspective in what is important, where do you really wanna spend your time, and for me, I think during my bonding leave with our second child, I had 4 months of freedom, and I call it freedom because it was a moment of no routines, no schedules. It gave me insight into what I truly wanted, and that's when I realized, freedom of schedule or freedom of choices was much more powerful than the fancy house or the beautiful cars, and I think for many W-2 employees like myself, you truly don't understand that feeling until to feel it. I think people talk a lot about passive income, but I had to experience it to really start chasing it, I think, more strategically. So, Viva, switching gears a little bit, we had to go through a lot of self-education to get here. Why do you think successful people in our circles are not talking about this?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot actually. And the circles that we're in is primarily like tech focused and stock focused, right? So you are following that blueprint for success in terms of retirement. I think most folks in our circles do have that high paying job, do have a savings account, do have discretional spending for vacations or fancy meals and gifts. I think though the blueprint of success is maxing out your traditional investments where you can, diversifying in the stock market. And it wasn't actually until I came back from my mini sabbatical, or as I've heard the terms mini retirement is what I took in my 20s. When I came back from my mini retirement and I was thinking about, like what's next, only then did I really discover wealth through real estate being an option. And that's when I started getting really curious about passive investing. And also, I think it's important to note that even though we call it passive investing, it's not really passive, right? There's so much work that we put into it in terms of gaining knowledge and mitigating risk through education. So it's passive in some regard, but there is a lot of self-education needed. What has your experience into this been? When you started thinking about passive investing through real estate, what was that like for you? How did you get started?
Yeah, so I think financial literacy is a personal responsibility. So and I frankly think that, our schools don't do a good enough job educating us, as we go through high school or college. And I think you can take a few classes here and there, but they really don't give you the tools to learn everything. So I always was an avid reader, and something I realized, this was years ago, something I realized as I was read like different biographies was every wealthy person has real estate as a part of their portfolio. And I think the question that I was trying to really solve was, why is that? What is it about real estate, commercial, residential, whatever the case may be? What is it about this particular investment strategy that so many wealthy people choose to dip their toes into it? For me, that came from finding people who were starting to think more like me. And I think, going back to our earlier question of why don't people in our circles talk about this, I had to change my circle. That's what I realized. I had to get into different rooms. I joined a mastermind and I was surrounded by, 6, 700 people that were all focused on creating financial freedom and doing that through real estate. When you start putting yourself in different rooms, you naturally start to think differently and you start seeing examples of others who've come from a similar background. And I think for me, that was the most powerful. I had to take the action to join a mastermind to catalyze this journey into setting up myself for passively for income.
Yeah, that's so great. And then when you take that action and you pay for that mastermind, it kind of lights a fire under you, saying, oh, wow, I invested in this. Better not waste it, I would imagine.
Yeah. Oh, completely. I mean, like when we were looking at various programs, and it's not a small investment by any means, right? You can find masterminds between $10,000 all the way up to like $50,000 a year. Now, when we were evaluating, my wife was like, okay, what's the ROI on this? Like, when are you going to get your money back? And how much are you going to learn? And there's no straight answer to that. The mastermind is just a vehicle to learn and to network and to grow. At the end of the day, you need to build a network to really catalyze your change.
Absolutely.
So, Viba, can you talk more about your entry into commercial real estate? What was that like?
I really got interested in real estate as a whole when I actually tried to buy a condo in the Bay Area twice and got priced out. There was a limit that I didn't want to exceed in terms of the price I wanted to put down. And in each case, for a 1 or 2 bedroom condo, I was in a bidding war. So I started looking into what are some other ways of getting into real estate and owning equity, as you had mentioned, while still being a renter. Just in terms of the finances and the numbers I ran, being a renter still made more sense. There was a price point I didn't want to exceed in to own a home. So that's when I got really curious and I started. I think Dad Poor Dad is probably like a gateway book for a lot of folks in this field. But I had kind of stumbled upon that book and got really curious as to, oh, like I didn't realize that someone like me could own a piece of a huge skyscraper in downtown San Francisco. And so I got really involved into looking into what would that be like and finding folks who ran these deals so I could invest and gain equity through real estate. I also knew that I did not want to be a landlord. My partner is a property manager. I have seen the day-to-day management of, screening tenants and taking care of tenant issues. Quite honestly, those are the reasons I like being a renter in a high cost city where I don't have to deal with the problems. Keeping those two requirements in mind led me to investing into an opportunity where I could pool money with other investors and buy a piece of a large building. Also, there were a lot of tax benefits as well. And what has your experience been? How did you get started into, commercial real estate and what are some of the benefits that you saw?
I got started in commercial real estate because I ended up doing this ridiculous calculation. At one point, my wife and I, we had a single family home. We were looking to purchase a larger home for our family. And so we put that first single family home for rent. And we were lucky that we bought that one during COVID, so our interest rates were actually really good, and we were actually, making a good amount of profit on that rental. But when I started calculating how many homes would I need to buy and manage to augment my W-2 income, the number came to something like 120 houses.
Oh my gosh.
Now I know that, like, between I don't know how many people would do that, but, like, there was no way I was going to buy 120 homes, and for me, it was like, "Okay, so clearly the problem I have is scalability." I needed a way to scale to, at least meet what my W-2 income was at the time, and then the other thing I was really looking for was risk diversification. So, when I was first looking into real estate as a whole, I was in a lot of the traditional investment strategies. I was doing stocks, bonds, I had a 401k and an IRA and all the other acronyms you could throw out there. But I was terrified that if we bought more single family homes, if one person or one tenant did not pay, I was completely 100% liable for making up that mortgage payment. So the idea of multifamily or apartment complexes was really enticing because it was about scale. It allowed me to have some tax benefits, like you mentioned, and it allowed me to diversify because if I bought partially even ownership in an apartment complex in Texas and then another one in Georgia, location wise, they're just different. They have different fundamentals. So I really liked that aspect of it too, without doing all the heavy lifting of day to day management.
I like what you said about, diversifying outside of your traditional acronym-based accounts. The one power move that I didn't realize for a very long time was how you could actually leverage an old IRA account to invest in commercial real estate through like a self-directed IRA. So I know there are all these other like hidden tips and tricks that we can uncover as we get more into these topics later on.
Absolutely. So this was a primer, right? This was for people to get to know us a little bit, understand our backgrounds and why we're even talking about financial planning and personal finance and real estate. We wanted to create rich roots to make this information accessible, right? Everything we'll talk about on this podcast is really around long-term wealth. We're talking about a 10 to 20-year game. And I think it's more around creating an approach for financial freedom, finding what that looks like personally for you, and then starting to create the life and taking the small steps to get there.
Yes, we're really excited to bring you real stories, real strategies, so you can build wealth with intention as you transform your financial future through informed passive investing and live life on your terms. Thanks for tuning in to Rich Roots Podcast.